Get away from here before I call the police. This building is for wealthy residents only, not people like you." The cruel dismissal came from doorman supervisor Michael Torres as he physically blocked the black man from entering the marble lobby of the Sterling Tower. He looked at him with pure disgust, completely unaware he was denying entry to Marcus Wellington, the real estate mogul whose $4.7 billion development company had built the entire 67-story luxury building. Let me take you back to 6:45 p.m. on a crisp Saturday evening in Manhattan's Upper East Side, where assumptions about wealth would cost careers and expose the brutal reality of discrimination in America's most exclusive residential buildings. Marcus Wellington had built his fortune one brick at a time, transforming vacant lots and forgotten neighborhoods into gleaming towers that redefined city skylines. At 51, he was the founder and CEO of Wellington Development Group, a real estate empire that had constructed over $47 billion worth of properties across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. His journey to the top of New York's real estate world had begun in the South Bronx, where he'd grown up watching abandoned buildings decay while dreaming of creating something better. His mother had cleaned offices in Midtown Manhattan, and his father had worked construction on projects that Marcus would later surpass in both scope and vision. After graduating from Columbia University's School of Engineering and earning an MBA from Wharton, Marcus had started with small renovation projects in underserved neighborhoods. But his vision extended far beyond individual buildings. He saw opportunities to create communities, to transform entire city blocks into spaces where people could live, work, and thrive. Wellington Development Group had grown to become one of New York's most influential real estate companies, responsible for luxury residential towers, mixed-use developments, and affordable housing projects that had housed over 200,000 families. Marcus had pioneered sustainable building practices, innovative financing structures, and community engagement processes that had become industry standards. But his masterpiece was the Sterling Tower, a 67-story luxury residential building on Manhattan's Upper East Side that had taken 8 years and $4.7 billion to complete. The tower was a monument to architectural excellence, featuring 200 luxury condominiums, retail spaces, a 5-star hotel, and amenities that rivaled anything in the world. Marcus had personally overseen every aspect of the Sterling Tower's development, from the initial design concepts to the final interior details. His penthouse occupied the top 3 floors, but he rarely used it, preferring his family home in Westchester County, where he could escape the intensity of Manhattan real estate development. Today's visit was unplanned. Marcus had been reviewing development proposals at his office when he realized he'd left important contracts in his penthouse safe. He'd driven into the city wearing his weekend clothes, dark jeans, a gray sweater, and comfortable shoes, looking like any successful professional running a quick errand. What Marcus didn't expect was that the staff of the building he'd created would refuse to let him enter his own property. The Sterling Tower rose 67 stories into the Manhattan sky, its glass and steel facade reflecting the city lights like a beacon of luxury and success. The building had been designed by renowned architect Santiago Calatrava, with interiors by Kelly Wurstler and landscapes by Madison Cox. Everything about the Sterling Tower communicated exclusivity, sophistication, and the kind of wealth that could afford the finest things in life. The ground floor featured a triple-height lobby with Carrara marble floors, hand-blown glass sculptures, and a living wall of exotic plants that created an atmosphere of natural elegance within the urban environment. A concierge desk managed the complex needs of residents who expected white-glove service for everything from restaurant reservations to private jet scheduling. The building's amenities were unparalleled: a 3-story fitness center with Olympic-sized pool, private dining rooms with celebrity chefs, a wine cellar managed by master sommeliers, and a rooftop garden with panoramic views of Central Park and the Hudson River.
Residents paid millions for their apartments and hundreds of thousands annually in maintenance fees. Security was paramount, with multiple checkpoints, biometric scanners, and a staff trained to recognize every resident, their family members, and authorized guests. The building directory read like a who's who of Manhattan's elite: Fortune 500 CEOs, entertainment industry moguls, professional athletes, and political figures who valued privacy and luxury above all else. Marcus had designed the Sterling Tower not just as a residence, but as a community for people who demanded excellence in every aspect of their lives. He had hired the best property management company in the city, implemented the most advanced security systems available, and created policies that prioritized resident satisfaction and privacy. But as Marcus approached his own building that Saturday evening, he was about to discover that all his careful planning hadn't prevented the kind of discrimination that wealth was supposed to eliminate. Michael Torres had been working as a doorman in Manhattan's luxury buildings for 12 years, developing what he considered a sixth sense for determining who belonged in exclusive residential properties. He looked for expensive clothes, jewelry, confident bearing, and the subtle markers that indicated serious wealth. When Michael saw the black man in jeans and a sweater approaching the Sterling Tower's entrance, every alarm in his head went off. This person didn't fit the profile of Sterling Tower residents or their typical guests. He looked too casual, too comfortable, too willing to approach the building like he belonged there. Marcus walked toward the building's main entrance, pulling out his phone to check messages as he approached the gleaming glass doors. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned not just an apartment in the building, but the building itself. "Excuse me," Michael called out, stepping away from his post to intercept Marcus before he could reach the entrance. "Can I help you with something?" "I'm here to go up to my apartment," Marcus replied, continuing toward the door. Michael positioned himself between Marcus and the entrance, his body language making clear that this was not a request, but a confrontation. "Sir, this is a private residential building. Do you have business with one of our residents?" Marcus paused, studying Michael's aggressive stance and realizing that he was being profiled and challenged based on his appearance. "I live here," Marcus said calmly. "Penthouse floors 65 through 67. Michael's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Sir, I know everyone who lives in this building, and you definitely don't live here." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow. He was being denied entry to his own home by an employee whose salary he ultimately paid, in a building he had personally designed and developed. "I'm Marcus Wellington," he said, maintaining his composure despite his growing anger. "I own the penthouse, and I think there's been a misunderstanding." Michael's expression hardened. He had dealt with people who tried to bluff their way into luxury buildings before, and he wasn't falling for whatever scam this man was running. "Sir, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it ends now. This building is for wealthy residents only, not people like you." Marcus felt the familiar burn of discrimination, but this time it was amplified by the setting and the irony. He was being refused entry to a building that existed only because of his vision, his investment, and his years of dedicated work. "There seems to be some confusion," Marcus said, his voice remaining steady. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor or the building manager." Michael's superiority complex was fully activated now. "My supervisor? Sir, I am the supervisor. I'm head of building security, and I'm telling you that you need to leave immediately. And I'm telling you that I live here," Marcus replied firmly. "I'd like to see the building directory or speak with someone who can verify my residency." Michael gestured dismissively toward the street. "The building directory is private information, and if you actually lived here, you'd know that." The circular logic was maddening. Marcus was being denied access to information that would prove his right to be there, with that denial being used as evidence that he didn't belong. "Sir," Michael continued, his voice rising with authority, "this building cost $50 million just for a penthouse. The annual maintenance fees are more than most people make in a year. Do you really expect me to believe that you can afford to live here?" The question was loaded with racist assumptions about Marcus's economic status, his worthiness to occupy luxury real estate, and his place in Manhattan's social hierarchy. "Get away from here before I call the police. This building is for wealthy residents only, not people like you." The words echoed through the marble lobby with devastating finality. Other building staff had begun to notice the confrontation, and a few residents passing through the lobby turned to watch the spectacle of a black man being publicly rejected from their exclusive building. Marcus realized that the situation was escalating beyond his control, and that Michael's prejudices were too entrenched to be overcome by reasonable conversation. "Before you call anyone," Marcus said, reaching for his phone, "I'd like to make a call of my own." Marcus dialed a number he knew by heart, putting the call on speaker so everyone in the lobby could hear. "David, it's Marcus. I need you to conference in legal and building management immediately. We have a serious situation at the Sterling Tower." David Chin, Marcus's executive assistant for 10 years, responded without hesitation. "Marcus, what's wrong? Are you safe?" "I'm physically safe, but I'm being denied entry to my own building by security staff who don't believe I live here." The silence on the phone was profound. "They're doing what?" "Head of security Michael Torres has refused to let me into the Sterling Tower. He's threatened to call the police and told me that people like me don't belong in buildings for wealthy residents." Michael was beginning to look uncomfortable. The man he was blocking was speaking with the kind of authority that suggested important people took his calls even on Saturday evenings. "David," Marcus continued, making sure his voice carried clearly through the lobby, "I need you to pull all the building management contracts, the development agreements, and the ownership documents for the Sterling Tower. Also, get our legal team on the line." "Marcus," David said, his voice tight with concern, "I'm pulling those documents now, and I'm calling an emergency meeting with building management. This is going to be a disaster for everyone involved." Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He answered it and kept it on speaker. "Marcus, this is Rebecca Martinez, General Counsel for Wellington Development Group. David briefed me on the situation. Are you being physically prevented from entering your own property?" "Yes, Rebecca. Michael Torres, head of security, has physically blocked my entrance and threatened to call police because he doesn't believe I belong in a building for wealthy residents." "Mr. Torres," Rebecca's voice came through the speaker with legal authority, "you are currently detaining the owner and developer of the Sterling Tower. Wellington Development Group built that building, owns significant portions of it, and employs the management company that signs your paychecks." The words hit the marble lobby like an explosion. Michael Torres's face transformed from confident authority to confusion, to dawning horror as the implications of Rebecca's statement sank in. "Wellington Development Group?" Michael stammered. "You're saying he's Marcus Wellington, founder and CEO of Wellington Development Group, developer of the Sterling Tower, owner of penthouse floors 65 through 67, and the person whose company employs your management firm," Rebecca replied with precise legal clarity. Other building staff had gathered to watch the confrontation, and Marcus could see the recognition dawning on their faces. His name was on the building's dedication plaque, on construction signs that had surrounded the property for 8 years, and on countless documents related to the building's development and management. Concierge manager Patricia Sterling approached hesitantly, her face pale with realization. "Mr. Wellington? I'm so sorry. I didn't recognize you. We weren't expecting you this evening." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus replied calmly. "You weren't expecting someone who looked like me to live in this building, so you didn't even consider that I might belong here." Marcus's phone crackled with another incoming call. "Marcus, this is James Patterson, CEO of Prestige Property Management. I just received an emergency call about an incident at the Sterling Tower. What the hell is happening?" James Patterson's company managed several of Wellington Development Group's properties, including the Sterling Tower. The contract was worth $12 million annually and represented one of their most prestigious accounts. "James, your head of security just denied me entry to my own building and threatened to call police because he decided that people like me don't belong in buildings for wealthy residents." The silence on the phone was deafening. "He said what?" "Michael Torres physically blocked my entrance, questioned my ability to afford living here, and told me that this building is for wealthy residents only, not people like me." "Michael Torres," James Patterson's voice came through the speaker with deadly calm. "You're terminated immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and you'll never work for Prestige Property Management again." Michael looked like he might collapse. His 12-year career in luxury building management had just ended in disgrace, terminated for discriminating against the very person whose success had made his job possible. Within 30 minutes, the Sterling Tower had been transformed into the scene of a corporate crisis that threatened relationships worth millions of dollars and reputations built over decades. Michael Torres was escorted from the building by corporate security, carrying a small box of personal items and the devastating knowledge that his discrimination had destroyed his career. His termination was immediate and for cause, with no severance package and no letter of recommendation. James Patterson himself arrived at the building, still in weekend clothes, but moving with the urgency of someone whose business empire was under threat. Prestige Property Management's contract with Wellington Development Group was worth over $50 million annually across all properties, and losing it would devastate the company. "Marcus, I cannot adequately express how sorry I am for what happened tonight. This is completely contrary to our company's values and training." Marcus appreciated the apology, but he was more interested in understanding how the discrimination occurred and what would be done to prevent it from happening again. "James, I want to understand how your head of security felt comfortable denying the building's developer access to his own property. This wasn't the momentary lapse in judgment. This was systemic bias that suggests deeper cultural problems." The investigation that followed revealed troubling patterns in building management practices across Prestige Property Management's portfolio. Security incident reports showed that Black and Hispanic visitors were stopped and questioned at rates far exceeding other demographic groups. Guest verification procedures were applied more strictly to people of color, and assumptions about residents' economic status often influenced how visitors were treated. Most damning of all, training had focused extensively on excluding undesirable people from luxury buildings, but had provided minimal education about avoiding racial profiling or recognizing unconscious bias.
Marcus realized that Michael Torres's behavior wasn't an isolated incident, but reflected broader problems in luxury residential property management. He commissioned an independent investigation led by Dr. Angela Washington, a former federal prosecutor who specialized in housing discrimination cases. Dr. Washington's investigation extended beyond the Sterling Tower to examine practices across Manhattan's luxury residential market. Her findings revealed systematic discrimination that affected not just building access, but rental applications, purchase approvals, and ongoing resident services. Data analysis showed that potential residents of color faced longer application processes, additional documentation requirements, and higher rejection rates, even when their financial qualifications exceeded those of approved white applicants. Building amenity access was restricted more frequently for minority residents,
and maintenance requests were processed with different priority levels based on subjective assessments of resident status. Security footage reviews revealed patterns of differential treatment in building lobbies, with Black and Hispanic visitors subjected to more scrutiny, longer wait times, and more aggressive questioning than white guests. Door staff were more likely to assume that people of color were delivery workers, maintenance staff, or unauthorized visitors rather than residents or legitimate guests. Most troubling, the investigation found that resident complaints about discriminatory treatment had been consistently dismissed or minimized by building management companies that prioritized avoiding conflict over addressing bias. Dr. Washington's report concluded that luxury residential buildings had become spaces where wealth was supposed to eliminate discrimination, but where racial bias persisted in ways that were subtle, systematic, and professionally devastating for property management companies when exposed. News of the Sterling Tower incident broke when a resident who had witnessed the confrontation shared their phone video on social media. The footage showed Michael Torres physically blocking Marcus from entering the building, the escalating confrontation, and the devastating phone call that revealed Marcus's true identity. The story gained immediate traction, particularly when Marcus's role as the building's developer became known. The irony of a real estate mogul being denied entry to his own $4.7 billion development was impossible to ignore, and the incident became a symbol of how discrimination persisted even at the highest levels of economic success. "Developer denied entry to building he built," read the headline in the New York Times. The story was picked up by real estate publications, civil rights organizations, and mainstream media outlets that recognized the broader implications for housing discrimination and economic inequality. The real estate industry's response was mixed. Some developers and property managers expressed support for Marcus and criticized the obvious discrimination he had faced. Others quietly worried about their own building's practices and began conducting internal reviews to identify potential liabilities. Civil rights organizations used the incident to highlight ongoing housing discrimination that affected people at all economic levels. The National Fair Housing Alliance issued a statement calling for comprehensive reforms in luxury residential management practices. Marcus used his platform carefully, focusing on systemic issues rather than personal grievances. In an interview with Real Estate Weekly, he said, "This incident is not about my personal experience alone. It's about the thousands of families who face housing discrimination without the resources to fight back. We have an opportunity to create real change in how residential properties serve all residents with dignity and respect." The changes initiated by the Sterling Tower incident created ripple effects throughout New York's luxury residential management practices and beyond. Other cities began examining their own luxury residential management practices, recognizing that discrimination was a national problem requiring systematic solutions. Law schools began teaching courses on fair housing practices as essential knowledge for real estate attorneys. Business schools incorporated housing discrimination case studies into their real estate development programs. Professional organizations for property managers and building staff established new certification requirements that included bias training and discrimination prevention as core competencies. Most importantly, the incident sparked conversations in corporate boardrooms and residential buildings across the country about the responsibility that came with managing housing for diverse communities in an increasingly diverse society. Marcus's legal team, led by Rebecca Martinez, used the Sterling Tower case to push for broader legal reforms that would address discrimination in luxury residential buildings. They worked with civil rights organizations to develop model policies that other property management companies could adopt. The case also resulted in significant financial settlements that funded fair housing advocacy and research into bias in residential real estate markets. More importantly, it established legal precedents that made property management companies liable for discrimination by their staff, even when that discrimination wasn't officially endorsed by company policy. New York State updated its fair housing laws to specifically address discrimination in luxury residential buildings, recognizing that wealth didn't eliminate the need for legal protections against bias. The legal changes extended beyond residential properties to commercial real estate, hospitality management, and other industries where assumptions about wealth and belonging could lead to discriminatory treatment. The Sterling Tower incident had effects that extended far beyond the building itself or even the luxury residential market. Marcus used his platform and resources to address housing discrimination at all economic levels, recognizing that bias in luxury buildings was connected to broader patterns of residential segregation and inequality. Wellington Development Group expanded its affordable housing development programs, applying the same design excellence and management standards to buildings serving lower-income residents. The company established partnerships with community organizations to ensure that all their developments contributed positively to neighborhood stability and opportunity. Marcus also worked with other developers to create industry standards that would prevent discrimination in residential construction, marketing, and management. The goal was to ensure that housing development contributed to community integration rather than perpetuating segregation. Most importantly, the Sterling Tower became a symbol of what luxury residential living could be when it embraced rather than excluded diversity. A place where excellence and inclusion worked together to create communities that reflected the best of urban living.
5 years after that Saturday evening confrontation in the Sterling Tower's lobby, the luxury residential industry had been fundamentally transformed. Property management practices that had once seemed normal were now recognized as discriminatory and professionally unacceptable. Building staff across Manhattan had been retrained to recognize and prevent bias in their interactions with residents and guests. Security systems had been updated to rely on objective verification rather than subjective assessment. Guest policies had been standardized to eliminate opportunities for discriminatory enforcement. Marcus Wellington had used his experience to become a national leader in fair housing advocacy, speaking at industry conferences and working with policymakers to address discrimination in residential real estate markets. Wellington Development Group had become a model for inclusive real estate development, demonstrating that luxury and diversity were complementary rather than competing values. The company's buildings were known for both architectural excellence and community engagement. The Sterling Tower itself had become one of Manhattan's most prestigious residential addresses, attracting residents who valued both luxury amenities and inclusive community values. The building's diversity had enhanced rather than diminished its reputation and property values. The real estate development industry had evolved to understand that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, it was professionally incompetent and economically destructive. Developers who failed to address bias in their projects faced legal liability, community opposition, and market resistance that could doom their developments. Professional education for real estate developers, property managers, and building staff had been updated to include fair housing practices as core competencies. Industry organizations required continuing education on bias prevention as a condition of maintaining professional certifications. Most importantly, the industry had begun to fulfill its potential as a creator of inclusive communities rather than exclusive enclaves.
spaces where excellence in design and management served everyone who could afford to live there, regardless of their background or appearance. The changes that began with one incident of discrimination at one luxury building had rippled outward to transform an entire industry's approach to residential development and management. The words that had started it all, "Get away from here before I call the police. This building is for wealthy residents only, not people like you," had become a powerful reminder of how assumptions about worth could undermine the very communities that real estate development was meant to create. But they had also become proof that moments of discrimination could be transformed into catalysts for industry-wide change when people with resources chose to use their influence for justice rather than just personal comfort. Marcus Wellington could have resolved the immediate situation quietly, ensuring better treatment for himself while leaving the discriminatory system intact. Instead, he chose to use his position as a successful developer to create changes that would benefit families who didn't have his resources or influence. That choice, between personal resolution and systematic justice, had rippled outward to create positive change throughout the residential real estate industry. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination was not just seeking individual access, but using that experience to build systems where everyone received the respect and dignity that quality housing should provide. The lesson of that Saturday evening in Manhattan had created changes that extended far beyond one building or one developer's experience. Real estate professionals learned to examine their assumptions about who belonged in quality housing. Property management companies learned that discrimination was both morally wrong and economically destructive. The entire industry learned that its success depended on creating communities that served everyone who lived there. Because in the end, this story isn't just about discrimination in luxury buildings. It's about the responsibility that comes with creating housing, the power of using personal experiences to drive systematic change, and the understanding that true residential excellence requires not just beautiful buildings, but inclusive communities where everyone is treated with dignity. Every resident deserves to be welcomed home without question or suspicion. Every guest deserves to be treated with courtesy regardless of their appearance. And every building has the power to choose between perpetuating exclusion and creating inclusive excellence that serves both community values and property values. If this story moved you, remember that housing is more than buildings. It's about creating communities where everyone belongs. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and never forget that sometimes the most important thing you can build is a system where everyone feels at home. Because the choice between accepting discrimination and fighting for inclusive excellence is one that faces everyone involved in creating and managing housing. The choice, as always, is ours to make. And the homes we build reflect the communities we choose to create.